Well, good morning. In fact, 10 years ago, I did a similar presentation at this quick-fire session about the importance of data for the industry in a rapid-fire session run by Mitch and the Congress here. The topic then was the significant role for Roche in the development of Herceptin across the board. And I played a clip from a movie of around that time, Jerry Maguire, when Tom Cruise and Cuba Gooding were debating Show Me the Money, and instead of money, we imported the word data. Now today I would argue that data has almost become the most important or the most critical element of our business. So keeping with the theme then, now and next, I'm going to talk about the impact of data on the industry over the past 10 years, where we are today, and probably where we need to go as an industry. And this leads me to the first question. So what is the estimated cost to bring a new medicine to the market today? So if you haven't answered, you should know the answer. It's $2.5 billion. And we really need to find more cost-effective ways of bringing medicines to the market. I'm ahead of the curve here, Joe, don't worry. The cost of developing medicines today, of course, is increasing as much as we're under tremendous pressure in price. And to help bolster this, we need to streamline our development process, and therefore all the different mechanisms of getting a drug to market is just becoming incredibly laborious and incredibly expensive, and we need to find ways of cutting those costs. If we take Herceptin as an example, we did a lot of work to prepare this submission back in the late 90s. We had thousands of pages of information collected during the clinical trial process and trying to find the benefit of this drug to breast cancer patients. Tons of phase 3 data, cost and benefit analysis, the impact to the financial system, and also epidemiology was starting to rear its head in terms of our application process. It was very time-consuming, and we had to look to several teams across not only Roche Canada, but globally to get this done. Now, the interesting part, of course, is when the drug data was produced, and it was done across 5 European countries, we actually showed that 27 or almost 30,000 patients were prevented from developing metastases with breast cancer. And this was a tremendous achievement and a very pernicious and, of course, nasty disease. And this graph demonstrates the actual number over time. And it resulted essentially in a blanket coverage of Herceptin across the country within basically a couple of months. And that leads us now to look at the journey from molecule to patient. Despite its success, it's still a very lengthy process. Far too many women went without access at a very critical time in their lives. And it begs the question, where are we today? The next generation of HER2 treatments, Kadcyla, Perjeta, we've recently brought to market. And in fact, the Perjeta-based combination now offers 16 months survival beyond the data that we produced for Herceptin. And that's unprecedented in today's cancer market. However, the time required for approval for reimbursement took just as long, if not longer, than for Herceptin. And limited clinical evidence and prolonged negotiations with Health Canada, something we all suffer, are costly and time-consuming, and this leads to a block on access to new medicines. So how long do you think it took for Perjeta to get to the marketplace?
When a felon's not
In fact, it took 24 months. Some of you a little more pessimistic. That's probably what you're experiencing out there. And as president of a company with a long history of developing cancer medicines, I find this really incredibly frustrating. It's just not sustainable for our business, and we can't commit these kinds of resources, financial and human capital, to bring medicines to market if this is a requirement every single time. And secondly, more importantly, it denies too many patients the treatment they need for far too long. So how do we fix this? Well, I think basically data is the new drug. No question that most learning occurs in oncology research from clinical trials. But if we look at the basis of clinical trials, 96% of patients who use these medicines are not trial participants. If 100 patients walk into a doctor's office, we're really only learning from 4 of them. The technology makes it possible to analyze unprecedented levels of data, but how do we collect it? How do we leverage it? How do we make it useful to our organization? And what we see today is a proliferation of non-traditional partnerships like Google, like IBM. And more recently, Roche signed a deal with a company called Flatiron. 2 young men in New York who qualified or graduated from Wharton Business School, sold their business to Google for $600 million, so $300 million each. Very nice business. And actually what they developed was the technology to show you a video when you do a search on Google. And they applied that technology one of the owners had a relative that had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. They applied this to try and improve the availability of data through the medical system. They used an oncology cloud platform, and they had advanced analytics to really dig into the data. So far, they've got 200 clinics in the US, oncology clinics, 2,000 physicians, and probably something like 400 sites of service. And they can draw upon this data very, very quickly and analyze what's working and what's not. So these applications of technology are incredible. We now understand how medicines are being used in the real world and how patients are responding to them. And we can leverage this into our business to see how diseases evolve and how we can treat those diseases effectively and how we can avoid giving the wrong treatments to the wrong patients. The challenge as an industry is how we adapt to processes and respond quickly to use and arrange this data. And we need to define changes in the healthcare system to allow it to evolve as quickly as the data management sector is evolving today. So, question, how quickly can 2,000 patients be enrolled into a metastatic breast cancer trial today? Oh, spot on. The answer is actually 7 months. So you see the improvement over the years. We're actually accelerating. And I'll speak more about the volume and the speed of that recruitment in a second. We certainly need to be very more nimble in how we operate, and we're very good at what we do, but we need to do it faster every single year. Others are already figuring out how to use the data and gather the data quickly and much more cost-effectively than traditional clinical trials that we as an industry have done for years. As I mentioned a few moments ago, the Dana-Farber study in metastatic breast cancer enrolled 2,000 patients in 7 months, and that's unheard of. If I said this fact 10 years ago, no one would have believed me. But this is literally a fraction of the time it would take to enroll patients in the normal clinical trial process. So we need to embrace change in our approach. Clearly, we're at an inflection point overall. There's so many different companies from different backgrounds moving into our space. And I think this change proves that we have the capabilities to leverage real-world data to inform how we design and conduct phase 2 clinical studies and move on. And if we can commit to collecting this data and collecting comprehensive real-world data, I think on an ongoing basis, this will help in improving in the speed of having drugs listed and reimbursed in the marketplace. And I believe we can move that timeline absolutely quickly ahead. And that would mean, ultimately, that more patients would benefit faster from the drugs if they really, truly bring a life-saving result at the end of the day. So if we can envision a reality in which everyone is comfortable with the phase 2 data as a measure of effectiveness and real-world data as the confirmation of effectiveness, the role of phase 3 data in bringing new medicines to patients will look dramatically different. So that inflection point means we as an industry need to do now what patients need next. 10 years ago, we used to look for the data. We sat out to answer a question that we believed or rather hoped would have a clinical impact on the right audience. We conducted the appropriate clinical trials. And today, our starting point is to identify viable pathways to treat disease based on the data. So looking at the wealth of information we already have about disease, about the human body, and refining our hypothesis, if you will, to target more precise pathways and develop molecules that have a greater chance of success. And we're able to leverage data in real time. Will clinical trials go completely the way of the dodo bird? Of course not, but the elements of them traditionally will. So not just in terms of what we hope to learn, but what we do with that information will continue to evolve to meet the needs of governments, payers, physicians, and patients. Thank you.